Welcome to the Potter Blog site, September 16, 2014. Now, the United States Army's Center for Aerobiological Sciences in Fort Detrick, Maryland, says Ebola equals influenza A in terms of airborne stability. And they indicate that the only thing that Ebola needs to go airborne, like flu, is winter weather. Now, we have a link to this source here. And here you can see where it's from, Center for Aerobiological Sciences. And we have a link to this on our webpage so you can read it all for yourself. And the key thing is, again, it says filoviruses have stability in aerosol form comparable to other lipid-containing viruses such as influenza A. They have a very low infectious dose by the aerosol route. So, let's go back to our summary here, see what it says. We got this little infographic. This is actually sort of a parody of a CDC infographic, which shows how they're going to have to change it for the U.S. for winter time. Now, if you think about what it said, Ebola has an aerosol stability that's comparable to influenza A. So once Ebola gets into the air, it hangs around in the air just as long as influenza A does. Doesn't die any quicker or slower than influenza A. So once it's airborne, it's basically its life expectancy in the air is functionally equivalent to influenza A. Now, Ebola can infect nearly every cell in the human body. Influenza A can't. Influenza A is limited to the number of cells it can infect, and we can go into more detail on that. You can look that up for yourself. So what's the difference? And why isn't this happening, or why isn't it noted as being happening in Africa? Well, just like influenza doesn't spread easily in warm equatorial regions of the world, airborne Ebola has the same issue. And here we'll sum it up in our analysis. It says, it's clear that when Ebola, let me zoom in on this a little bit. It's clear that when Ebola is in the air, it's at least as hardy as influenza. It's also clear that coughing and sneezing is what makes influenza airborne, and the same should be expected of Ebola. If you influenza is aerosolized by coughing and sneezing. You cough and sneeze while you have Ebola, you're going to aerosolize it the same way. In Africa, coughing is a symptom of Ebola, as is bleeding out of the nose. Now, moreover, just as sun, heat, and humidity along the Earth's equatorial regions serve to burn influenza out of the air, the same should be expected of Ebola. The difference with Ebola is that even the tiniest amount of physical contact with infected body fluids can cause infection. So hence, unlike flu, Ebola also readily spreads in equatorial regions. And when Ebola spreads to the regions of the Earth which experience fall and winter flu seasons, airborne Ebola infectious routes are to be expected in conjunction with the direct contact infection routes seen in Africa. Now, the key thing here to realize, as we've stated, is that Ebola has the capability to infect pretty much every cell in the entire human respiratory tract. Similarly, our skin offers little resistance to even the smallest amounts of Ebola. How much airborne transmission will occur will be a function of how well Ebola induces coughing and sneezing in its victims in cold weather climates. And as we've said, coughing and nasal bleeding have been reported in Africa, so the worst should be expected. In that regard, co-infections with flu, cold, or even seasonal allergies will readily transform Ebola victims into biowarfare factories. And unlike flu, a person need not inhale airborne Ebola to be infected via an airborne transmission route. Merely walking through an airspace or touching the objects therein in a place where an Ebola victim has coughed or sneezed is potentially enough for a cold weather infection to occur. Unlike flu, which basically you have to inhale and get into your lungs or get into your eyes, Ebola can infect you pretty much anywhere on your body or anywhere in your body. As such, all indicators are that Ebola's potential rate of infectious spread in cold weather climates is explosively greater than what's occurring in equatorial Africa. And this is where it gets very interesting. It says, in that regard, the government's filovirus animal non-clinical group, FANG is what they call themselves, they are standardizing on an airborne Ebola infectious challenge of 10,000 plaque-forming units. And basically, any medical countermeasure for Ebola submitted to the government is going to have to be able to prove that it can defeat an airborne Ebola infectious challenge of 10,000 plaque-forming units. The study here that we clicked on earlier, this study, it basically says that even 10 plaque-forming units is enough to consistently infect somebody with Ebola from an aerosol challenge. Now, it's even much smaller than that. You can look up what a plaque-forming unit is, but it only takes 1 to 10 viral particles to infect a person on the skin. Now, if you inhale 1 to 10 particles and they come in contact with something along your respiratory tract, then you will be infected. Now, with a number that small, though, there's also a chance that you will inhale it and then exhale it with it not touching anything. Hence, the larger number of 10 plaque-forming units, and we're not going to get to the transition between viral particles and plaque-forming units because you can look it up. But that begs the question then of mutation. And why are experts out there right now pushing a fear on the public of some future airborne mutation of Ebola that's going to make it go airborne, when it's clear from the U.S. Army's own documents, from the experts, the people in biowarfare who are handling and testing this stuff, when they say the risk is here and now? So why are experts pushing this future mutation fear on the public? Well, what we see is the primary benefits of this media mutation gambit is that when the public becomes aware Ebola is airborne, the public will default to blaming a mutation rather than the experts withholding information or having prior knowledge of Ebola's transmissibility. And the second thing, it's also an important thing, is that a future fear is great for fundraising for the public seeking to avoid it. We got to stop this before it mutates. Well, it's already there. And experts are aware that most mutations lead to dead ends. Mutations for viruses are typically a very bad thing because it makes it less infectious. So, you're getting a load of BS when they're talking about this mutation risk. And here's the third thing. The expert clique comes down hard on experts that do anything which is perceived to immediately raise public fear. An accurate warning to the public can immediately negatively affect a forthright expert's budget and prestige. If you're an expert, a virologist out there, or somebody else, you're not going to lose any credibility with your peers by risking the public's health by telling them that there's nothing to fear or there's little to fear. But if you accurately tell them that there's a lot to fear and to fear now, you will get a backlash like you will not believe. That's why many of these people don't speak up. Now, the fourth reason is public knowledge of imminent public health threats negatively affects supply chains and the logistics for planned responses. If right now everybody went out and bought P100 masks and N95 masks, there wouldn't be any left in the world. If most people, and even if most countries, knew of the risk, they wouldn't be sending stuff to Africa. They'd be holding it back to protect themselves when it comes into their own country. So the next time some expert pushes the Ebola mutation risk, ask them to specify exactly what mutations will be required to do as they claim. When they refuse, ask why experts spelled out the mutation steps of avian influenza and why they won't do it for Ebola. The answer is Ebola can already infect pretty much every cell in the human respiratory system. With avian influenza, they'd say, well, we have to have this mutation so it can infect certain lung parts in a human, and this mutation so it can infect other lung parts in a human. It's not the case with Ebola. Ebola can damn near infect anything it wants to with the tiniest amount possible, 1 to 10 virus particles. Be very concerned.